recommitting ourselves to make sure that we give support to you as well.
You keep using the word, of course, because it's appropriate, man and men. You're a woman. How did you feel about all of this?
I felt fantastic about it.
Okay.
I know there are those who had some concerns that women were not invited. In a big sense, I think it was they were actually applauding black women. They were saying that we understand that you have shared a disproportionate amount of the burden in our communities historically, and we're here to say that we're going to join with you. We have to get our own act together first, but we are going to become partners. So I felt somewhat honored that the men were there. I think there were signs that said, we will never disrespect black women again.
Yes.
You know, there are all kinds of nice things that they were saying about black women. So we're very supportive of what happened there, and hopefully we're going to be able to work very closely with African-American men and doing some of the things that came out of that march.
Now, I don't know how to say this to you, but it seems to me that the message coming out of this is that African-American women are more committed to their communities and their families than African-American men. Is that so?
No, that's not it at all. We're saying that we live in a racist community, one in which white males particularly have always felt threatened by black males. They have discriminated against them in ways that black women have perhaps not felt as deeply.
Why?
I think that's a big question, but certainly there's always been that competitive edge, both sexually and economically. White males have always set the standard in any community, and anyone who poses any kind of threat to that particular position, I think, is you know, held out to be suspect.
So that's, you're talking about the men now.
About the men,
women.
right.
Women are easier for people to deal with in terms of their own power. Is that what you're talking about?
Right.
Yes.
And so black males, unfortunately, have had to share a great deal of the problem because we live in a white male-dominated society.
Okay, I'm going to ask you one. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. So no, you were asking
Yes.
whether black women were the ones who were doing all the work in the African American community. No, but also make sure you understand that we're talking about a certain segment of the population. But black men, most black men are very positive, involved men in their communities. However, we share disproportionate amount of the problem because of white racism.
Okay. Very quickly, Minister Farrakhan has both given a very positive message here, and he's also talked about Koreans and Vietnamese and Jews as being bloodsuckers in their communities because they open up stores and drain the wealth. How do you feel about that?
How do I feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, are you willing to say that? I mean, to me it seems that, for example, if a Jew would open up a store in a white community, but Anglo-Saxon Protestant, one could say, could make the same sort of charge. What are you, who are different, doing in our community? How do you feel about it?
Well, it's not an issue of how I feel. I think maybe I can try to explain what he's saying.
Okay.
And also know that a local legislator tried to explain that and got the label of anti-Semitic attached to her name. I think it's unfortunate that we're in a climate now where when we say things or when we try to explain things that we get labeled in such a way that causes problems for us. So with the threat of that, I will say that
with the risk of it.
the risk of it, I will say that what she's talking about is historically, African Americans have not owned their communities. We're probably the only ethnic group that has not had a real stake in their communities. They're not the ones who own the stores and the businesses and everything else, the institutions. And somebody else has always owned them.
So you see that as racist oppression as opposed to the lack of initiative on the part of blacks?
But I see it as, yes, oppression, yes,
okay.
Economic oppression that has been with us since we've been here. Okay, and so it's true that other ethnic groups have owned our communities, and what we want now to do is to own a piece of our own community. So I don't see that as anti-Semitic or anything.
Okay, let's go to OJ because we only have about 2.5 minutes now, real quickly. There's still a lot of people who are ticked off about this, who are convinced the guy did it, convinced he got away with it, and this has led, I think, to exacerbation of some racial tension around the country. Can you address that?
Well, I think we're still operating under the notion that African-American males are criminals. I mean, that's part of the stereotype that the African-American males have to deal with, the ones who went to Washington. I can't say whether O.J. Killed his ex-wife or not. I don't think any of the people who watch television can draw that conclusion either. But we have to believe that the jury did the best job that it could, and I'm fairly comfortable with that decision that they made as I listened to how they went about making the decision that they made. But I think it's again part of racism that we're now saying that O.J. Has to be treated differently because a jury went through a process and found him not guilty.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that there was any visible sign of racism in terms of the jury itself? In other words, do you think that the fact that there were so many African Americans on the jury said, we are not going to convict this man because he's black?
Oh, not at all. Yeah. African Americans serve on juries all across the country, and if you look at some of the districts, especially in New York, where there's a large number of African Americans, you'll find that they convict. As a matter of fact, they convict at a higher rate probably than other groups, and I'm talking about black defendants.
Right.
So they've had a history of convicting. I don't think that was an issue at all.
Alice Green, thank you for coming in.
Thank you for
You're
inviting
wonderful,
me.
and you're a great asset to all of us. Thanks
Thank
very
you.
much.
I appreciate that.
Hello and welcome to Q&A. I'm Michael Carisse, and tonight we're coming to you from the office of Dr. Alice Green, who is Executive Director of the Center for Law and Justice in Albany, and she'll be telling us what that group is all about in a minute. She's also a well-known civil rights activist in our area, and thanks very much for having us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Give us a line or two about the Center for Law and Justice to remind people what you do.
Okay. Well, the Center for Law and Justice is a community-based organization that's concerned about the criminal justice system and the impact that it has on particularly poor people and people of color. It's designed to empower people to work to make changes in the criminal justice system so that the system is effective and does not discriminate against them.
On this show, Dr. Green, mostly we talk about the budget, and your expertise is criminal justice, but the two sort of are intersecting this year, as they did last year. There's an awful lot of proposals that are in the budget that have to do with criminal justice this year, and I know you're unhappy with several of them, particularly as it pertains to juveniles and how they will be treated differently if Governor Pataki gets his way. Why don't you tell us what your main concerns are?
Yeah, I think this year's budget is an outrageous budget as far as it relates to poor people and people of color. Last year, Governor Pataki in his budget started out a program of increasing certain penalties against people who would be, African Americans would be affected by those particular penalties. But he also instituted the death penalty, which we believe will be carried out disproportionately against African Americans and Latinos. This year, he sort of continued in that vein, and he's made several proposals that we think are extremely harmful. One is that he proposes to increase the number of bed spaces in prisons. This means that he will probably add beds to existing prisons as well as build 3 more prisons by the year 2000. Now, right now, if we look at who's in prison, we find that 85% of the people who are in prison are African Americans and Latinos. So I think we will see that they will certainly be affected by this increase in beds. So he's proposing to increase the number of beds to 8,800 by the year 2000. And of that number, 7,000 of them will be double cell units, which is another problem. He's proposed increasing the number of people who were sharing one cell.
And your big concern about that is what exactly?
Well, I think if you look at the cells as they now are situated in our prisons, they really are not fit for one person, and you're putting two people in one cell, and I think that increases all kinds of problems, like health problems. We're concerned about what this might mean in terms of other kinds of tensions that would grow out of it.
Well, the prison guards are expecting more
Prison
violence.
guards expecting violence, and they're opposed to putting two people in one cell. So I think it's inhumane to do that. And again, we're concerned about what it's going to do in terms of creating more conflict inside the prisons.
The supporters of the governor will tell you, as you know, that these kinds of proposals to increase the prison cells, to toughen up on sentences, and the other kinds of things that he wants to do are effective, that they have decided, and the statistics, they say, will show that basically we know now who commits crime. It's repeat offenders, and if you lock more of them up and if you keep them in prison longer, you're going to see a reduction in the crime rate. Why are they wrong?
Well, that's not what's happening. Most of the people who go into prison are people who have been convicted of some kind of drug offense, and we see that that's increasing rather than decreasing. The other thing is that certainly we're not what you call soft on crime. We believe that if people do commit crimes, that they certainly have to pay the price for that, but it depends on what we do that would make it effective. Certainly putting people in prisons where they've cut down on programs. For instance, one of the major programs that have been cut in our prisons is the education. Prisoners are no longer able to get a college degree while they're in prison. But all of the research that I've ever seen shows that prisoners who are educated are actually the best risk for returning to communities, that they lead constructive lives once they have gotten an education and can be involved in a very constructive way in the communities. So to cut a program that has been shown to be effective doesn't make a lot of sense to us. What we're doing now under the Pataki administration is actually cutting not only the education program, but all other kinds of rehabilitation programs, so that the communities who will suffer from this are going to be African American and Latino communities, because they're the ones that are going to be victimized, because once you put someone in a prison and do nothing to rehabilitate them, they simply come out perhaps worse than they went in, and they help to destroy a community and a family structure.
As I mentioned at the beginning, the treatment of juveniles is also another thing that the governor wants to change, and I know you're upset about, and essentially he would treat more juveniles as adults, depending on their offense.
Exactly. He would treat children as young as 13 years of age as adults in the system. We are finding that very difficult to understand, certainly because someone commits what we think of as an adult crime does not make them an adult. We don't treat children as adults in any other institutions that I'm aware of in our entire society. So why do we think that we can treat 13-year-olds in that way? We will be putting them in adult prisons once they reach the age of 16, which again is a major problem, because they will no longer have access to the few rehabilitative kinds of programs, counseling, and schooling that they would get in a Division for Youth facility. So we believe this is going to add to the problem. It's going to criminalize more of the African American Latino population, because when we look at the statistics, 96% of those who are in secure facilities who are labeled as juvenile offenders happen to be African American and Latino.
I've heard criminal justice experts who are not necessarily allied with the Republicans or Governor Pataki specifically say that there is some logic to treating juveniles a little more strictly or harshly, I guess, if you will, than they have been, because of what they call the gateway offenses syndrome. That under the current system, kids start to get in trouble, and maybe it's minor offenses, and the system doesn't come down hard enough on them, and therefore they get into a pattern repeating those minor offenses and getting into more serious problems, and then before you know it, you've got a full-fledged felonies going on. What do you think about that?
But to put them in with adults does not in any way solve that problem. If we find that we must treat juveniles more harshly, then I think we must do it in a different kind of system. They might have to stay longer in DFY facilities, but they need more counseling. They need more therapy. To put them in an adult prison, which does not function very well now, in with older men and women, who could probably teach them more about crime, I think is not the direction to go. So I think we might need to be doing something different, but we don't need to be putting children into adult prisons that don't function anyways.
Where do you think the Assembly Democrats are going to draw the line on some of these proposals this year? Do you have any sense yet what's going to come out?
Well, unfortunately, this is election years, and we're finding that enough Democratic legislators are not speaking out and being tough enough to fight some of the proposals that have been presented by the Pataki administration. There is some concern that's been expressed on the part of the Black and Puerto Rican